Another thorny issue, to stay or go, that's a question when it comes to the International Criminal Court, or ICC. This week, International Relations Minister Lindiwe Sisulu indicated that government may backtrack on a decision by the ANC that South Africa should withdraw from the court. On Wednesday, she said that the decision to leave was taken under the previous administration. No final decision had been made by Cabinet. Well, South Africa, of course, a party to the Rome Statute, which is the treaty that established the ICC that can try world leaders and politicians for genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes. In 2015, government said it would withdraw. That came after a dispute over government's failure to arrest the Sudanese president Omar al-Bashir when he visited here, even though he was subject to an ICC arrest warrant. That attempt was unsuccessful, though, after a court ruled the decision had to go to Parliament. The decision to withdraw, however, confirmed by the ruling ANC in its national conference last year. To discuss, we're joined by Ottilia Maunganidze from the Institute for Security Studies, live from Pretoria. Thank you for being with us, Ottilia. Firstly, we're still part of the ICC, and you're saying that if we leave, it won't change the way we're viewed on the continent. For one, why not?
Well, whether or not South Africa leaves the International Criminal Court, I think it does rest on the South African government to do that. The 2016 happened was a lot of people presumed that if South Africa, which it had done at the time, announced that it would leave, that a number of African countries would follow suit. What we saw in the months after that and in the year and a half since then is that African countries, in fact, did not follow suit. The AU summit, we actually saw a number of African states, Nigeria, Cabo Verde, Malawi, coming forward to say the decision to remain or leave within the International Criminal Court must always rest with states themselves, and whether or not one country, let's say South Africa, or what has happened with Burundi leaves, should not influence the decision of individual other countries.
So we often speak of ourselves or think of ourselves as a leader on the continent, but this suggests something otherwise.
Well, in fairness, I think it depends on what the issue is. Issues such as the issue around international criminal justice, while we have seen some decisions coming out from the African Union, quite scathing of the International Criminal Court, individual countries hold different views on this particular issue. I think on issues around economics, for example, South Africa remains a country that is regarded as a leader on those issues. But there are issues like on international criminal justice, for example, where other countries are taking the lead on how to deal with international crimes, but also on how to advance responses to international crimes on the continent.
All right, so government suggesting, well, the minister is suggesting this week that we may stay a party to the Rome Statute. The ANC says the government has to consult the party. The party is the one that's decided. Where do you think this decision really lies? And I guess it's also influenced by the fact that we're heading towards an election.
Well, ultimately, the decision rests on Parliament. So while the Cabinet can make a resolution, for example, whether to withdraw or to remain within the International Criminal Court, it rests on parties within Parliament to table that motion of withdrawal. It's only after Parliament has made a decision whether or not South Africa will be withdrawn from the International Criminal Court that the executive will then have the mandate to do so. Previously in 2016, the executive went ahead and notified the UN that they intended to withdraw, and the High Court here in Pretoria actually ruled that it's up to Parliament to make that decision, not the executive on its own. So the ANC, if it gets the numbers it needs from other political parties to withdraw from the International Criminal Court, it can give the executive that mandate. It's not up to the minister alone, unfortunately, or cabinet alone.
All right, so this is up in the air, and it has been for a while. The big question is, should we be part of the International Criminal Court? Is it the right thing to do?
A great question to ask. Ultimately, South Africa being within the International Criminal Court gives it the opportunity to be able to actually reform the institution and hopefully be able to build up an international criminal justice system. So I think South Africa remaining within the International Criminal Court is a better option for South Africa. But I think also, quite importantly, there has to be a concerted effort to ensure that bigger, more powerful states that are currently not part of the International Criminal Court actually join it, so it can be a truly international court and not only a court of 122 states.
And that would be the United States, surely, but what are the chances of that?
Well, we'll wait and see. The United States had previously signed the Rome Statute and then chose to unsign it. Of course, under the current presidency of President Donald Trump, the likelihood of signing up to a multilateral organization is quite slim. Other countries like India, for example, there's potential there that they could ratify the International Criminal Court statute.
Let's also clarify the big issue, the whole idea that African states, African leaders are being targeted by the ICC. Is there truth to that?
Well, since the ICC's inception, the majority of its cases, be it situations that are sent to it, have actually come from African countries themselves, and it has dealt with a number of issues. Perhaps the most notorious is the indictment of the Sudanese president, Omar al-Bashir, who visited South Africa in 2015, but also Muammar Gaddafi, the then leader of Libya before he passed away. So the fact that there have been a number of high-profile Africans charged by the International Criminal Court is something that has raised a lot of concern, particularly for African leaders and perhaps less so for African citizens, with African leaders seeing the International Criminal Court as really having a magnifying glass, as it were, on African issues over issues elsewhere. And perhaps for the International Criminal Court to be able to assert its legitimacy, it does need to look outside of the African continent. And there are a number of issues. Palestine is one of them, and Palestine has referred itself to the International Criminal Court. The situation in Georgia is another. The situation in Afghanistan and Iraq are issues that the International Criminal Court ought to seriously consider looking into, so that it isn't perceived as a court that's only dealing with African issues.
We're running out of time, but very quickly, the DRC's Jean-Pierre Bemba, a very high-profile case, and he's just been acquitted after being found guilty of war crimes. Does that affect things? Does it suggest the process is fairer for African leaders or not?
Well, ultimately, a court isn't judged on whether it just convicts people, but whether justice is actually done. An acquittal is also a sign that the judicial process is not necessarily just leaned towards conviction. What is more interesting with Jean-Pierre Bemba is now that he is free, and perhaps if the current issues that are being resolved at the International Criminal Court are resolved, what it means for the DRC's elections going forward. He was in many ways touted as someone who could lead the DRC, and so now that he has been acquitted, a lot of eyes are on the DRC elections, whether he will go back to the Congo to contest the elections, or whether he will rally support behind the other opposition leaders. It's no secret that he doesn't support the incumbent Kabila.